Well, hello and welcome back to the latest episode of the Love Machine podcast. Now, today we've got a truly unique and inspiring topic that will blend spirituality with modern dating: dark retreats. Now, imagine spending time in total darkness, completely cut off from distractions. Just you, your thoughts, and your emotions. What if this unique practice could help you become more self aware, break old relationship patterns, and unlock the inner confidence that you need for better dating and relationships? Well, in this episode, we'll explore how embracing the solitude of a dark retreat can lead to breakthrough in your dating life and help you find deeper, more meaningful connections. By retreating from external noise, individuals are better able to reflect on themselves, their past, and their emotional needs, which can ultimately help them navigate the dating world with greater confidence and self-awareness. And to help me, I am absolutely blessed to have someone that has been through this several times, the fantastic Minnie Lane. Now, Minnie has carved a unique and successful 17-year career as a personal development coach, helping men develop in maturity and attractiveness. Named a top global dating expert in 2023, she is considered a leading voice in the industry. And in 2019, Minnie featured as a lead contributor and spokeswoman for the critically acclaimed documentary The Pickup Game. Released during the Me Too era, Minnie spoke to large audiences at international film festivals and became a catalyst for change to help clean up the toxic underground pickup artist industry. And Minnie's work has attracted attention across international TV, press, podcast, and radio. Minnie, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. I've got a little dog here. That's we're talking about cutting out distractions, and I've got a little dog that is desperate to distract me. So I
Wonderful.
apologise if you could hear him trotting around during that.
I couldn't hear anything, but it's nice to see him and welcome. We'll do a group call today then, and we'll
Yeah,
see
there's
what
three of us
happens.
on this call.
We'll do that. Now, I'm really thrilled to have you on here, and because what you've done, you've been through this dark retreat business,
Yeah.
and I've heard of it, but I didn't know much about it. So there's a slight difference there. So for those that don't know, can you explain first of all a bit more about you and what you
Yeah.
do to help people, and also what a dark retreat is?
Yeah. So, well, I'm surprised that you've heard of a dark retreat. Actually, that shows a massive difference from the time when I did my first dark retreat, which would have been about eight. It must be about 8 or 9 years ago now, actually, and I hadn't even heard of it at the time. So to explain a little bit about what a dark retreat is, the main purpose of a dark retreat is sensory deprivation. So we can think about how in day-to-day life we are constantly bombarded with sensory input. And often some of this sensory input doesn't get processed in the moment. And then we don't often have the space to go back and process old emotions. We're just putting more and more and more input in, and we don't make that time and space to deal with the old input that hasn't necessarily been integrated yet. So the purpose of a dark retreat is to really block out all of the input so that you create that space and you can allow your old emotions and unprocessed traumas, if you like, to come to the surface for processing. And so that's why I did it.
Amazing. There's obviously lots of benefits to doing this, but to me, it sounds very much like solitary confinement when you are in prison or during the war. I know that monks go through this to some degree. They will lock themselves away sometimes with no speaking to anybody in the dark, and they'll try and focus on their on being at one with God, don't they? They do that. That's
Mhm.
probably where it originally comes from, and it's a very spiritual thing. Just showing you that I know about this, just so you know.
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Yeah,
Just
you're absolutely right. It's an
yeah,
ancient practice.
yeah.
And your reaction just then was very similar to my friends' reactions at the time. I was in Guatemala traveling when I did my first one, and I'd met up with a few friends for Christmas. And after Christmas, I well, actually on Christmas Day we had our house broken into, and I had all my stuff stolen. I had an entire backpack stolen that had my passport, my laptop, like all my valuables in. So I was in a bit of a strange place post Christmas. My plan had been to go down to Nicaragua, and then I couldn't because I'd had my passport stolen. So I was actually just sort of looking around the local area for things that I could do to make the most of my
Mm.
final week while I got an emergency passport. And I came across this dark retreat in an ashram, and I thought, wow, that sounds amazing. And when I told my friends that was what I was going to do, they just thought I was completely mad, and they were like, "Isn't that what people do in prison? Like, why would you voluntarily submit yourself to that?" Which I understand. And I think that was one of the main reasons for me wanting to do it, was because when I really thought about that, I thought, well, why is it that it's considered torture to just be in solitary confinement? Because that is what it is. You're just in an enclosed space. It's just you, and the entire thing is completely pitch black for the entire time that you're in there. Um, and that's really worth mentioning, actually, because quite often I'll talk about dark retreats to someone, and then after speaking about it for a bit, they'll say something like, so what, did you read a lot in there or something like that? And I'm like, no, I think you haven't understood what's going on here. Like it really is completely pitch black for the entire the first one I did was a week. Oh, sorry, my dog's whining. We're just
That's
gonna
okay.
have to get over
At least it isn't me whining. It's okay.
it. Yeah, the first time I did a week, and the second time I did 10 days in my bedroom during lockdown. I blacked out my bedroom and ensuite, and I paid my sister to feed me every day.
In the dark.
Yeah, so we designed my room and bathroom so that we had like a light-proof feeding system. So I would she would knock on the door when she came up with my food, and then I would go into my bathroom, shut the door, put an eye mask on just to make sure no rogue light photons got in my eyes. She would come in, put the food down, leave, black out the front door again, and then knock again, and I would come out. So we managed to do the whole thing pretty much in silence. Definitely we managed to block out the light. We managed to do most of it in silence, bar giggling. I think there were a few times when we just lost it, and we were just found ourselves laughing about it.
Are you allowed to have music when you're doing this, or not? Is the whole point everything's cut out?
I mean, if you're doing it on your own, of course you can do whatever you want to. I decided to limit sensory input as much as possible. So even meals, I limited to two a day, because I really wanted to find that part of me that's not the body.
Yeah.
And you find when you're in the dark for a really long time, it is a really strange experience, because I didn't even see my own body. I didn't even see my own hands, my own face for 10 days. And that's a really unusual experience. And so I wanted to cut off as much as I possibly could from all of my sort of bodily wants and needs. If you think about it, really all of our needs are actually the body's needs. All of the things that we're trying to achieve in day-to-day life, it's actually our body's problems. We don't have problems. The true us doesn't actually have problems. So I wanted to really connect with that part of myself and not be waiting for lunch or waiting for dinner, being aware of what time it was, those kind of things. So
Wow.
yeah,
So
so I chose to do the entire thing in silence both times.
Blimey, that's very intense.
Yeah.
The closest thing I've ever done to this myself a few times was a flotation tank. That's where
Yeah.
you get the tank and you shut yourself in the darkness and you play relaxing music and you float on water and salty water. That was
Yes.
for an hour, and after a while,
Yeah.
it's really relaxing. You sort of get used to it. And if you've done that yourself, if you tried doing that
Yes,
flotation.
I have actually. My ex-boyfriend runs a
Oh,
flotation tank center.
well, I'm so glad I mentioned it then. This is great. Just bring
I'm
that
going to put
memory
Pepper
back.
on my lap
Yeah.
and see if he'll
Oh,
calm
bring
down.
the dog back. That's
Here
wonderful.
we go. Here
There
we
we go.
go.
Hello. Yeah, so I've done that and it's great, but I could not imagine doing that for more than an hour because it's just too intense after that point. It can feel a bit claustrophobic, but you do get used to it quite quickly, I think. Is that how you felt in the retreat? But what's the sort of time it takes to get used to it?
Yeah, so I would say all of that stuff that comes up at the end. So the part where it's comfortable is almost not the important part. It's the part after that, the part where you're like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. I think that's the time to ask yourself why. Why? What is it that you don't want to be with? And how can you make peace with that part of yourself? So everyone will have different things manifest, but essentially whatever does start to manifest is the part of you that doesn't want to be with yourself for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And that's the part of me that I really wanted to meet, because my trauma is abandonment stuff, really. That's my main thing. My mum committed suicide when I was a teenager, and that kind of trauma creates a lot of questions like, do I matter? um, am I worth staying for? Those kind of questions. And I noticed that the relationships that I attracted when I was younger, sort of in my 20s and in my teens, i I was attracted to very, very stable guys and men that I knew would never leave me, never, never, never leave me. And looking back now, that was the most important thing that I was looking for unconsciously, was this sense that I was so special to someone and I mattered so much to somebody that I was completely irreplaceable, because that's what I needed to feel safe in a relationship, to actually be able to go into an intimate relationship again after being essentially betrayed by my parental intimate relationships. And you spoke at the beginning of this about how dark retreats and these kind of practices can be helpful for relationships. And really it's about getting to know those parts of yourself and seeing your patterns, and really understanding why you're attracting certain things. Because we've got our false wants and our true wants, I like to think of it as. And as you know, I've seen it even in some of your emails, the emphasis on really knowing what you want in a relationship is super important. But for me, it's that what you want is layered. Often people think that they know exactly what they want, but they're only really talking about their surface level wants. They haven't really dealt with what's underneath that. So to give an example, somebody might say to me, I know what I want. I want to be the CEO of my company. That's what I'm striving for. I'm trying to work my way up, and eventually I want to be the CEO. And that might be like a surface level want. And then when I sit with that client and I really break it down, we might eventually find out that what he really wants is the respect of his father, or something similar to that. And it's these kind of practices are about getting to know yourself on that kind of level. And recognizing that sometimes we're being pulled into relationships with people from places that aren't actually healthy, and we're being attracted to relationships for the wrong reasons, or we're using a relationship to sort of fill a void in our life that actually means that we're not doing the work to fill that void ourselves. So I've come to the conclusion over time that my abandonment issues can only be solved by me. They can't be solved by somebody else. As much as it might help me to build trust that I'm worth being with and I'm worth staying for, if other people consider me to be worth staying for, that's a bit like a bucket with a hole in it, where I need to keep filling it up from the outside. I need every day somebody to tell me that I'm loved, I'm worth staying for, that they need me. And as soon as that relationship breaks down and that person decides to leave, then I'm on the floor again. Whereas when I spend the time with myself, getting to know myself on this deep level, and I show myself that I matter and I am worth staying for and I am worth spending time with, by literally making it the most important thing, I'm making it more important than absolutely everything else, and spending all of that quality time just with myself. At the end of that 10 days, I've shown myself through experience that I matter and that I'm worth staying for, and that time with me is enjoyable and interesting. And that means that I start to see why somebody might want to spend time with me. And I've really shown myself at the experiential level that I am worth those things. And that matters, because when we don't know that we're deserving of something, even when we get it, we will often then sabotage that relationship and not be able to allow that person in to show us those things that we need. Because if we have a deep sense that we're not worth spending time with, then even when we get that person that's like, okay, I want to spend all my time with you, we feel like, oh, but what happens if you do? What parts of you are you going to find? And am I ultimately going to get rejected when you get to know me more? And I think we all harbor these kind of intimacy issues to some extent or another. And it's really about making sure that you're spending the time to get to know what your issues are, and actually doing the deep work to heal in a more permanent way than by trying to fill those voids from the outside.
That's very powerful that you did that and people can go through it. But how do you do that when you're sat in the darkness and you're left to your own thoughts? What techniques do you have to use? Do you just sit there and just wait to see what happens? Or do you have certain meditations or certain affirmations? How do you go about it exactly?
Yeah, so I have a background in Vipassana meditation. I started one of the early things that I did in my spiritual journey was I went straight into a Vipassana meditation course, which, for those who don't know, that's a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which is the pure teaching of Buddha. Essentially, it's the practice that Buddha taught, and you meditate for, I think, 10 hours a day for 10 days, and the whole thing is in silence. So I've done quite a few of those courses now. I find them extremely powerful. I highly recommend them to anybody, especially if you're resistant to that kind of thing. It does bring up a lot. So I found particularly the first one extremely challenging. So I would recommend someone really finding a time in their life where they've got the time and space to do that processing. But that practice, I can't fault it, to be honest. I think Buddha was a very, very wise man, and he really teaches to sit and just observe reality. All of your trauma will come to you if you do that, and then really processing it. The act of processing your trauma is no more complicated than that you just observe it rather than reacting to it, and that's it. You don't identify with it, you just watch it manifest, and you don't make it into a problem that needs solving. So essentially, when I do a dark retreat, that's what I'm doing. I'm creating the space by blocking out new sensory input coming in. I'm creating some space and allowing those old unprocessed emotions to come to the surface. And what's interesting is that you go on an emotional journey similar to what you would in day-to-day life, even though nothing's happening. And that in itself is quite a good teacher, because we tend to live our life as if everything is happening and that's making us feel a certain way and have a certain experience. And actually, through practices like meditation retreats and dark retreats, you really see the truth that that isn't the case, that it's actually the vast majority of it, at least, is the other way around, where you're having an emotional experience and then you're projecting it onto what's happening. And you can't deny that in a dark retreat, because nothing's happening, right? And you still go on an emotional experience. And in both the retreats, I had a time where I felt absolutely terrified. And the first time was sort of, somewhat, you could imagine it being justified by what was happening, because I thought somebody was trying to break into the hut, and I thought it was the middle of the night, and I was alone in Guatemala in this little hut. It turned out it was just the caretaker coming to check the door, and it was actually about 6 o'clock in the morning. But obviously, I didn't know that. So yeah, I had a very, very difficult, challenging experience. And then similarly, on my second retreat, which was in my bedroom, I also had, it was on the second or third day, I crawled into my bathroom, and I just suddenly became aware that I felt really, really scared, as if something bad was about to happen, or there was some sort of dark force or person in there. And I just recognized that as an opportunity. I recognized, okay, something has now come up that's deeper emotions. This isn't what's happening now. This is childhood stuff. And as I just sat with that, the feeling, the physical feeling of being on edge and having sort of heightened senses and feeling a bit jumpy, and just allowed that to happen from an observational point of view. So the adult me almost held that childhood version of me and said, it's okay, show me what's wrong, show me what's wrong. And then I started to get sort of memories of the day that my mum died. And I had just had a normal day at school, and she didn't turn up to pick us up from school. And so eventually me and my sister walked home, and that jumpy feeling was the feeling that I had all the way home. I had this deep sense that something wasn't right, that something had happened. I almost, every time I turned a corner, I almost expected to see a crashed car and an explanation for why my mum hadn't turned up. Eventually I got home, and I did find the reason, unfortunately, why she hadn't turned up to pick us up from school. But that whole journey for me,
You found out yourself?
I did, unfortunately. Yeah, that
I'm
was.
so sorry to hear that. Okay, right.
It was. Do you know what? I'm more than happy to talk about it, because I think it's important to share our stories. I really do. I think it's important to be vulnerable and tell the truth about these things that happen to us. And I don't talk about these things because I need pity or concern anymore. There probably was a period when I was younger when I needed those things, but now I really like to talk about it because I feel at absolute peace that this happened. As a young teenager, I did come home from school and find my mum hanging in the garage, and that is, as you can imagine, a huge thing to go through. But now of course, I miss my mum and I wish that she was still here given the choice, but I don't mind that this happened to me. And I think that that really is testament to how these kind of deep practices can help you heal on a really, really deep level, because I feel nothing but peace that this is just part of my journey, and it's shaped me into the person that I am, and has made me the coach and the teacher that I am. And I'm able to help other people with these kind of traumas because I'm able to hold a lot of other people's pain. It doesn't scare me when people are going through deep grief or pain or confusion, because I've dealt with, and I'm still dealing with, those deep emotions in myself. And the way I see it is that this is just my journey, that this is, everybody's got their story and this just happens to be mine. But I'm I'm more than happy to talk about it in this context because, I'm not unusual in going through, unfortunately, this level of trauma.
No.
Many people do, and in a way, I'm lucky because my trauma is quite known to me, whereas a lot of other people feel afraid of doing things like going into the dark because they don't know what's going to come up. And actually, I think that can be a lot more difficult.
Can I ask you a question, Nick? You said nothing's off limits here,
Yeah.
and it's nothing too bad. I'm building up the
No, go
expectations,
for
as I always do all the
it.
time. When you were going through your retreats and you were experiencing these altered thoughts and states that you were going through, did you
Yeah.
feel any sort of connection to your mum then?
Do you know what? I wrote about, I've written about both these retreats. If anyone is interested to know the entire story, I have on my website, which is minnie hyphen lane.com. I have written in depth about both the experiences, but um one of the main reasons I wanted to do the first one was because I really expected to connect with my mum. And I think because I went through such a huge trauma in losing my mum, it wasn't just the loss, it was also the memory, the vision, the horrendous thing that I saw, the confusion of it, the fact that I was with my little sister who hadn't seen, and so I wasn't even able to react to it because I didn't want to scare her, and just the whole, there were so many elements that made that a huge trauma. That one of the things I've struggled with in life is that it effectively seems to have blocked a lot of memories of my mum, and that the connection with the mum that I knew almost got replaced with this, difficult day when everything changed, and I was left with that sense of I actually don't know who she was anymore, because I had no idea that that could have happened or that she was going through anything difficult. It was all hidden from me. And so I've often hoped to connect with my mum by doing various things, ayahuasca, mushrooms, meditation, you name it, and left with a sense that I haven't really connected with her and I still want that connection. And when I did the first dark retreat, I was told that often people experience mother type pain because the experience is a bit like being in the womb. That's the last time that any of us were in a confined dark space for a long time, and so it can trigger trauma to do with the mother relationship. And so I really thought that that was what's going to happen. I went in completely prepared to have like horrendous flashbacks and everything. And I got to the end of the retreat and felt, oh, it didn't come up. A lot of other stuff came up, but my relationship with my mum didn't come up. And it was only on reflection, when I actually wrote my blog about it, that I realized that my relationship with my mum had come up in lots of different ways. The time when I felt that somebody was breaking into the heart, I I was brought back to the trauma of that day, and all the fear that I felt. Um, but just throughout the experience, various things happened too. There was a point where I realized that if I screamed, no one could hear me. And the woman who'd been feeding me, in a way, she became the role of mother, because she was the one coming into the heart. She was the one that I had to write a blind note if there was anything wrong. So I was like writing in the dark. I drew a self-portrait every day as well of what was going on, as a little diary. Um, but when I realized that she couldn't hear me when I screamed, when I thought that I was being broken into, that really is a sense of my relationship with my mother. This sense of there's no one to help me, there's nobody around, there's no one guiding me. Like I'm screaming for help, and no one can hear me because she's gone, she's too far away. And in those ways, my relationship with my mum came up, because my relationship with my mum is that she hasn't been here when I wanted her to be. Unfortunately, that's the relationship that I've had with her for the last 25 years. Um, and at the end of the retreat as well, the lady looking after me forgot to come and get me. She'd got the dates mixed up.
What?
Yeah, so
Horrendous.
even though I was in pitch black darkness the entire time, I somehow did manage to keep track of each day, because I was making sure that I drew a self-portrait every day. And I obviously thought that I'd got it wrong, but I was there ready for her to come and collect me. You're supposed to come out for sunrise, and she didn't turn up. And I found that really difficult. And again, it was like in those ways. And my mum would often, bless her, my mum was absolutely amazing, but she was also quite disorganized with her time sometimes, and quite often we were left places, when she'd be late to pick us up. And obviously on the day she died, she didn't turn up to pick us up. And so in those ways, my mum did come up, but it wasn't in the way that I wanted her to, if that makes sense. I wanted to
Yeah.
feel that deep, loving, motherly bond, the unconditional love of my mum. And I still have not had an experience where I've really felt I've connected with her again in that way, which is a shame.
It's really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. I know that's quite a deep thing to talk about.
No,
I've
that's
got a
fine.
client at the moment, and her mum died when she was very young. So we've been examining that a lot in her coaching sessions. But I don't think it was suicide. I don't know the exact reason. I never asked that question. It hasn't come up. But she says that throughout her life, she always felt she could talk to her mum. Her mum was talking to her like a spiritual presence. But
Mm,
recently, over the last year, she's lost connection with her, and that's really bothering her.
mm,
And I've been handling that with her. So I'm just wondering, I think when you go through these different states, like you mentioned mushrooms and all the things you can do, people do often experience strange states, and this will bring out the same things. But you're absolutely right. You've done this twice now. So maybe that's your answer in itself, that you don't need to have all the closure and all the connection. You've got it yourself within you now, haven't you? And you've done this. You've got the abandonment's gone,
mm.
hopefully. But do you still feel that? Do you feel better for doing all this?
So that's a very interesting question. I was having this chat the other day with somebody about, when you ask yourself, am I happier now than I used to be?
Mm,
So the answer is undoubtedly yes, but the type of happiness that you have is very different from what you imagine that you'll have. It's more like a deep sense of peace and contentment and oneness that's not really anything to do with your life circumstances. And so it's very different feeling from, say, the happiness that you get when you achieve something really great, or in fact, a lot of that drive to achieve, I feel, has been lost as I've done more work on myself. And
right.
I
Yeah.
suppose that's because I've lost the parts of me that were being motivated by fear. The parts of me
Okay.
that, wanted to achieve so that I finally mattered, and so that I was finally important, and so that people would want to, whatever else was going on that I was completely unconscious of. As I've become more at one with myself, I no longer really care so much about any of those things. And so it's it's a strange feeling, because in a way I want some of that motivation back. The part of me that is, driven to finish my book because I want to be somebody that's written a book, so I can tell people I've written a book and feel good about myself, that kind of thing. That's all gone. I now don't care if I've written a book or not. And so I'm left only with the part of me that just wants to write a book because I've got things that I would like to share.
Hmm.
And that is a much more genuine place to be creating from, and that's really beautiful. But that's not that's not always there. Sometimes I'm not feeling motivated or inspired in that place. And the part of me that used to be driven by external things is is now kind of gone or going. So there's definitely an adjustment period. And I think the more of these kind of practices you do, the more you realize that it's often only with hindsight that you realize what you've really gained from something, and that can be years later. um
Yeah. It's a work
I
in
can't remember what
progress.
your original question was. Sorry, it was more about.
No, I was asking if you're happy and if you feel better for doing this. And There are people out there listening to this now who are thinking, well, this sounds like an interesting experiment, but they are terrified of trying this. So I'd like to
Yeah.
ask you now, if that's okay, how can someone do this? Either the easy way or the hard way? Because we guess that there's two ways of doing this.
Yeah.
Hey, can you explain them quickly they could do?
Okay, so as I said, even when I did my first dark retreat, I think I'd done 4 Vipassana courses at that point. So I actually asked the women if I could go in for a couple of days, and she told me to go in for a week instead. She said, you should go in for at least a week because you're ready for it, basically. And she was right. I was more than ready. I honestly think I could stay in for 6 months if I didn't have other things that I had to do. It doesn't
Nice.
bother me at all. Now, it's not going to be right for everybody to just go straight into sitting in the dark for a week. In fact, that's not going to be possible for most people, um, not just practically, but also in terms of what they're emotionally capable of.
Mm.
So I tell my clients really just to start with, just put your phone down for 10 minutes, see how that goes. Sit on your bed or on the sofa or on the floor and just put down everything for 10 minutes and just notice everything that comes up. Notice how many times you want to grab your phone. Notice how many excuses you make. Notice if I'd done this, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, I know exactly what would have happened. I would have sat down and then my brain would have gone, oh, hang on, I need the toilet. Hang on, I'll just make a cup of tea first. Oh, hang on, I'll do that. Oh, hang on, someone needs me. And then it would be over.
Mm.
So find out where your current boundary is for spending time on your own. And that's going to be different for everybody. Some of my clients, they'd have no problem with that. Others,
Yeah.
they can't even sit still for 2 minutes. And so put everything down and just sit and don't do anything. See what manifests and see how long you can stay there and just time it. And when you get to the edge of that, when you start to feel really restless, just see if you can stay just a little bit longer. And then get to know really where your current edge of spending time with yourself is. And for a lot of people, it can be surprising. It can be like 3 minutes or 10 minutes or even half an hour. Or do you know what? Even if it's an hour, that is essentially telling you currently how much you like your own company or feel comfortable in your own company. And that will give you an idea of how much you expect other people to feel comfortable in your own company. And that's going to be affecting your relationships, right? That's going to give you some indication of how comfortable you feel with intimacy and for somebody else to see those parts of you. So yeah, my advice is you don't have to go straight into a dark retreat. This could be for 10 minutes just before you go to bed, or for 10 minutes in the day, and just find out what you're currently comfortable with.
That's such great advice there, because so many of us are just glued to our phones 24/7. And that's me included, I'll be honest with that. It used to be the internet. I was always obsessed with checking things on the internet, and I've got better at that, but it's the mobile phone's the problem. Is there a client? I check it first thing in the morning. Is there a client? Is there something I have to deal with? Which doesn't get you in the right state of mind. But I love it when I go on a cruise. I'm booking one next year. That's why it's fresh on my mind and I'm mentioning this. But you go on a cruise and there's no Wi-Fi unless you pay loads of money to have it. So I lock my phone away in the safe, and then for a week I've got no mobile phone. And then you don't miss it. After a while, you forget it even exists. And
Yeah.
I imagine it's the same state of mind for this. You think you can do much more than we can do so much more you think you can. You're capable of this once you get the ball rolling.
Yeah, the first 10 minutes is going to be the hardest 10 minutes. If you can
Yes.
get through that, it's a bit like going running.
Yes.
My brain tells me that I don't want to run anymore pretty much as soon as I've walked out the door, to be
Yeah.
honest. And then there's like various breakthroughs that you've got to do of just like pushing through that boundary, and your ego saying, oh, my dog's having a little grumble.
I think your tummy is
Yeah.
rumbling. You're hungry.
Yeah, it's my dog. Yeah, you keep meeting those boundaries, and then every now and again, my mind will have been telling me, say for, I don't know, 30 seconds, it's like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Come on, you're tired. You've got other things to do.
Mm.
And then what I notice is that I push through that, and then there's a period of a few minutes where I've just forgotten. I've forgotten that I didn't want to do it anymore,
Yeah.
and then I just run for a few minutes without even really noticing that I'm running.
Mm.
And it's interesting how my body just isn't tired and doesn't need to stop during those few minutes. And I think anyone that's been running can relate to that to a certain extent. And it's the same with spending time on your own with removing distractions. If you manage to push through the initial bits of your brain telling you that that you should be doing something else, or that this is too difficult or whatever, then think of it like a child having a tantrum. You know, if a child wants some sweets, then if it has a tantrum and you give it some sweets, it's just gonna always have tantrums. But if it has a tantrum and you don't give it some sweets, what's gonna happen is it's gonna have a louder tantrum. And then if you still don't give it sweets, it's gonna have a louder tantrum. And if you still don't give it sweets, it's gonna have a louder tantrum. But eventually, it's gonna realize that its efforts are not paying off, and it's gonna quieten down. And your mind works in exactly the same way, except that we've been feeding it with sweets our whole life. So we've trained it. Oh, you know, if you don't get a sweet, just shout louder, and then you'll definitely get a sweet. And so, however much you've been addicted to feeding your mind, when it tells you that it doesn't want to be on its own, it doesn't want to be with you, that's what you're going to have to undo, essentially. So the more you've distracted yourself, the harder it's going to be to undo these distractions. But there will be a breakthrough point at which it becomes easier.
It reminds me of my Shakti mat. If you heard of a Shakti mat, I've got one of those. You lie on this bed of nails pretty much. And for the first 5 to 10 minutes, it's painful. I don't want to do this. What on earth am I doing this for? I must be absolutely insane to do this. After 10 minutes, you forget you're even on there. And your body will sink into it and it becomes a habit. And then the next day you pull it out again. Oh, it's painful again. I don't want to do this. And it goes through. And eventually it becomes so normal that you realize the benefits and it becomes absolutely natural. But having said all that, I really want some sweets now. So thank you for that. I've got some on my shelf. Someone bought me a massive box of wine gums the other day, so thank you. And I haven't opened them because once these wine gums get open, that's the end of them. But
wine gums are delicious.
They are good ones, are delicious. I love them. But I'm not going to open them. I'm going to go for a run after this actually instead. How about that? That's more inspirational.
Yeah, go for a run.
Last question for you, and I ask everyone this. Alongside locking yourself away in darkness for long retreats, do you have any sort of other daily habits and routines that you enjoy?
Yes, I do. So I try to meditate first thing in the morning, even if it's just for 10 minutes or so. I try to have that real quiet time, and I make myself a matcha latte because I'm one of those wankers. I
I've got
really
some, never
really
used
like
it.
matcha lattes.
Do you?
So I make a matcha latte and I sit with it, and that's my headspace time. And I try to just not let anything interrupt that quality me time. Then eventually my dog will get up because he's lazier than me, so he gets up after me. And then I go to the park, and that walk in nature. So I go to the park every day with my dog, and I just let him run around on his own for about an hour, actually. I'm very lucky to have that kind of lifestyle. I do appreciate that. And I sit and I have a coffee while he runs around. And again, that's my time to really check in with myself, my breathing. And then I come back and I have the same breakfast every morning, which is I have kefir with chia seeds, pumpkin seeds. I can never
I'm
say
seeing a
it.
theme here.
Acai berry powder, and goji berries, and
Well, all the good
so
stuff.
I just have that. Yeah, and I feel that really sets me up for the day, and a large glass of water.
Amazing.
And the way I see it is, if I started my day like that, then my day is much more likely to go in a similar direction. And if I don't have that, if I miss that, which does sometimes happen, if I get distracted, maybe I wake up to a problem with a client or something that needs my attention, I notice that it's really, really hard for me to then get back into the flow of my day.
Yeah.
So I really do believe in a morning routine. I think that's important.
I love that. Do you know, someone said that to me about matcha a couple of years ago. I've got one in my cupboard, ceremonial grades, expensive, never opened it. Maybe I'll see if it's still in date and I'll have some tomorrow. I don't really like milk very much. That's why I haven't made it yet. But you can use it with water, can't you?
I have it with oat milk. I have it with Plenish oat milk, which is the only oat milk I drink these days. It's
Sponsored by Plenish.
It hasn't got any of those seed oils in it, which I don't know. You're always told something different every day about what's bad for you, what's going to give you cancer and stuff, aren't you? But anyway, seed oils is one of those things that's in question. And especially if you're a vegetarian or a vegan, a lot of the stuff that you're eating has these oils in. So if that's in question, I just think I'm just going to cut it out for now. And I really like Plenish milk. Yeah, this is a good advert for them.
Maybe I'll try it. I was telling my mum off yesterday for having peanut butter that was full of sugar and salt and weird oils. I said just have pure peanut butter oil. That's what I have. Not the oil, but the peanut butter itself. With it is healthy. Very last question for you. You've mentioned it already, but how can somebody find out more about you and read these blogs and find out your amazing tales?
Yeah, so I've got a website which is minnielane.com, minnie-lane.com, MINNIE-LANE.com. And I've got Instagram, which is Minnie Lane Coach. Or you can email me at info@minnie-lane.com.
Amazing. I've only read a few of your little blogs. I've read the first parts of it. I've got to say something. They're really well written. And I want to read them all, but I thought I'm not going to read them all before the podcast because then it will influence what I'm going to say to you. I wanted to go into it fresh. I will finish reading them because they were very entertaining, even the titles of them. Or did you say that a dark retreat was like an all-inclusive for somebody, the spiritual people?
An all-inclusive holiday, yeah, for spiritual junkies.
Yeah, which made me laugh at that, and I love that. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Minnie. It's been an absolute pleasure. I think I'll definitely have you on again soon, and we'll talk about some dating stuff and some more about what you do in that way. That would be wonderful.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for having me on, and have a lovely day.
Bye to both of you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I'd love to give you a free copy of my latest book, which you can download right now from my website, jamespriest.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, I'd really appreciate it if you could share the love by taking a few seconds to write a positive review on the iTunes store right now. See you next time.